What's up, everybody? I'm trying to tweet a link as I'm trying to multitask here. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the last of the Blogger Bowl 2023
It's getting
season
real.
previews.
It's getting real,
It
boys.
is getting real. We had real life college football last night, the NAIA. Do you guys know what NAIA stands for?
National American Institution of America.
Of
Athletics. Athletics.
National Athletic Institute.
Institutions of America.
No.
I beat Phil.
According to one of my high school coaches who played NAIA football, it stands for Nasty Asses in Action. Which I don't remember most of the things my coaches told me in high school, but I do remember that. So a great game last night is Valley City State University beat their arch rivals from Jamestown to win the paint bucket, the 124th meeting between those two schools. So like actually like a rivalry.
VCSU.
Packed stadium, students rushed the field afterwards. It was just kind of after everything that's gone on, particularly over the last like month in college football, just to kind of see the normalcy of students rushing the field after a game was nice. And well, we're going to talk about the world ending because I think we should just jump right into it because
they're going out with a bang, though.
It's going to be awesome. It's going to go out with a bang. It's dying. We know it. It sucks. The administrators, the commissioners, the university president, the networks, they have all conspired to kill something that is so beautiful and is coming into what might be its best form. So as we've been doing during these previews, let's take a look at the ESPN SP Plus power ratings for the Pac-12. You see, again, we talk about tiers. You have really a top tier within about 3.5 points of each other, with USC up top, a 1.9 point favorite over Oregon, Utah, and Washington in that group. Then the next tier, UCLA and Oregon State. Then kind of in a tier by themselves, Washington State, which kind of makes sense because of where they're located, I guess. And then Cal, Arizona, Arizona State in a tier, and then Colorado and Stanford bringing up the rear. The one thing I'll say, because I didn't write down a whole lot of notes on this, good luck, Troy Taylor, head coach at Stanford, a guy who I think is a really good head coach. Funny enough, he's a Cal guy, but took the job at Sacramento State, took them from a nothing FCS program into a top 5 program in a few years. He's really good at what he does, but they have torn that thing down to the studs, and that might be the hardest place in college football to win right now. And it takes a really special kind of sick human being to be able to build a program at Stanford. Because don't forget, David Shaw didn't build it. He just maintained it very well for a long time. It was Jim Harbaugh, who's a certified lunatic, who was able to build that program into what it was. So that's a really, really tough job. They stink. I have some thoughts on Colorado later. What do you guys think again? Like when you look at this, obviously, again, for the 5th time, priors do kind of matter here, which is why Oregon and Utah might be ahead of Washington. But when you look at these, what stands out?
For me, it's quarterback play. I mean, I look at this from top to bottom, and some of these can completely like go away because a good chunk of these teams have quarterbacks. It's not like they can take over games, but have quarterbacks who have taken over games. So it's kind of in that upper echelon. I'm really excited to see the quarterback play in those games, but also some of the lower tier teams have guys who can take over. And as we've seen outside of really Utah in recent memory, that the Pac-12 defenses have been pretty bad, which makes it a much more fun league for these dynamic quarterbacks. And probably a reason why we've seen so many of these dynamic quarterbacks go, jump to these types of jump to this conference.
For me, it's just the potential for chaos. And part of that stems to what Phil said there with the quarterback play is, I don't know, 4/5 of these teams or whatever have quarterbacks that are capable on any given night going out and beating USC or going out and beating Oregon. Like Arizona has Jaden DeLauro, who's a very good quarterback. He can go out and beat any one of those guys. Like Washington obviously has Michael Penix Jr. Cam Ward on Washington State can go out and beat just about anybody on his best night. You can't say that about every conference. We talked about the SEC yesterday, and there's, 2 teams right at the top. There's probably 2 teams right below, but there's, 4 or 5 teams that are really in serious contention at the top there, and the rest are not. There are just pretty much outside of Stanford and Colorado, like any one of those teams can beat anyone on a given night. And we saw it last year with Arizona State, a not very good team, knocked off Washington, and that's what kept Washington out of the Pac-12 championship in the college football playoff, despite how good and impressive they were. So that's why this year it feels like the conference of chaos, but even more so this year, it feels like that's what we're going to get.
And I'm curious if there's going to be just another level of animosity towards the kind of teams who broke that apart. So a lot of this will be personal, and I'm curious if it's primarily geared towards USC and UCLA who kind of started the transition and started those dominoes, or if it's going to be a generalized effect. Because I think there has to be some animosity among the fan base, among the coaches, among the players. We're pretty pissed at USC for kind of leading this.
They started this,
to move to the Big Ten.
I don't necessarily think the coaches or the players are going to care all that much, but I do think the only way that I think it's really going to matter is when teams have to go to Corvallis or when they have to go to Pullman, because it looks like the ACC might throw Cal and Stanford a golden parachute along with SMU to come join. And so Washington State and Oregon State are going to be the two who are kind of left in a lurch here. And I think going to those two places is already kind of a pain in the ass to begin with. And it'll be even more so. I think that the intensity will be ratcheted up. Although I believe both the Apple Cup and the Civil War are being played at Washington and Oregon, not at Oregon State and Washington.
I believe
State.
You're correct. Yeah,
I think so. That's a little bit of a bummer. Did you guys see my tweet about the quarterbacks in the Pac-12 today?
No, haven't been on Twitter much today.
It was more so doing Colorado research, something that I wanted to kind of look up for Colorado. But I put together the list of the recruiting score, composite score for all 12 starting quarterbacks in the Pac-12.
Oh, I did see you talking about this.
So you did see this?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, I was going to ask you the trivia question. So Cam Ward did not have a recruiting score. He was an FCS quarterback, kind of came out of nowhere. But the fact that Michael Penix Jr. was the lowest rated of the quarterbacks in the Pac-12 coming out of high school, player development matters. And that was, I thought, kind of a fun note because that dude can ball. But we'll start at the top of the SP Plus rankings with the runners up last year in the Pac-12. The team that probably would have won that game and gone to the playoff had Caleb Williams' hamstring not exploded, but the USC Trojans, Lincoln Riley, kind of a miracle worker, got them to 11-1 in the regular season. Like I said, probably would have been in the playoff if Caleb doesn't destroy his hamstring. They do lose a lot. They lose skill position guys at wide receiver and at running back and the offensive line. They're turning over a lot, but that's what they do. They go to the transfer portal. That is what Lincoln Riley's been doing. Marshawn Lloyd, the running back from South Carolina, is coming in. Dorian Singer, who I talked about in our superlative show, as a transfer from Arizona at wide receiver. They've got a good freshman class coming in. Only 2 offensive linemen back, and Lincoln Riley hit the portal to try to fortify it. Although I was kind of looking back at some stuff on his tenure at Oklahoma, offensive line's kind of a weird blind spot for Lincoln Riley. He's got to kind of be more consistent in their recruiting and development of linemen once they go to the Big Ten. Don't think that's going to matter a ton. Defensively, probably the worst decision that anybody made this offseason was retaining Alex Grinch, the defensive coordinator. It's going to be a huge question mark. They went with 6 players out of the portal. Again, they are just turning over this roster year in and year out. As also a note, they were horrendous on special teams last year. They were one of the worst teams in the country on special teams. And with the margins as thin as they might be in the Pac-12 this year, that's going to matter. They have a very, very soft schedule the first 6 weeks of the season, and then a very, very not soft schedule the last 6 weeks of the season. The last 6 weeks of the season, they are at Notre Dame, home against Utah, the ultimate sandwich sleepy time game at Cal, who's coming off a bye, before they host Washington, go to Oregon, and then end the season at home against UCLA. Matt, what are your expectations for Lincoln Riley, Caleb Williams, and the crew at USC?
I mean, I think Caleb Williams is going to be really good, but it's a whole bunch of new skill position guys. And I know the pieces they brought in are nice, but they're a step back from last year. I mean, Jordan Addison's a first-round pick and one of the best receivers in college football, replacing the backfield. Like you said, offensive line has kind of been an issue for Lincoln Riley, and they're replacing some new pieces there. And defensively, I know they brought up some pieces up front that they like, and they had to do some retooling in the transfer portal, but they did some retooling in the transfer portal last year too, and it was an all-time bad defense. And I think there was a target on their back last year, but there was also some skepticism of, well, can they really put it together this quickly? And they did. There's no wondering this year. The target is fully there on their back, and I think they're going to face a much improved Pac-12 where I don't think USC is a better football team than they were last year. I'm not sure they're a worse football team than they were last year, but I think the teams around them that they're going to be going up against, are better teams. I think Washington's going to have a pretty good, a better defense from last year. Their front four is pretty solid. Oregon's being built in the Dan Lanning mold. I mean, obviously he's got to adopt some West Coast stuff with Oregon, but like, he's a Georgia defensive coordinator. He's going to want to come and play big physical defense. Utah, we saw what Utah did to USC twice last year and then just kind of beat them up in the Pac-12 championship game. Oregon State's a big physical team who's not afraid to beat you up. There's a lot of big physical teams in the Pac-12 that saw the blueprint to beat USC last year, the one Utah put on the field. And if USC can't increase their toughness, increase their physicality, get better at just doing the basic things defensively, like tackling, I think they're going to find themselves in some trouble in some games this year.
Yeah, I agree with that. The question mark, which seemed like the most obvious answer of all time, of they should have gotten rid of their defensive coordinator.
I don't get it. Like, does Alex Grinch have some photos of Lincoln Riley we don't know about, or what's going on there?
Yeah, who knows? It's that for me was such a bizarre situation, and it's going to be similar to last year, I think, where it's their offense is going to be good, their skill positions are going to be good. A guy who I'm looking out for is freshman Zacharias Branch, the overall number one wide receiver recruit in the country. I saw him in the All-American Bowl last year and was just like, man, he is absolutely
he's good.
Freaky. Yeah, he's freaky. So if someone like him can explode onto the scene and be a guy, they also have a tight end wide receiver hybrid, Deuce Robinson, who's also very, very good, one of the top tight ends in the country last year. So if those guys can come along and be sort of de facto impact freshmen right away, it still doesn't solve for shootouts, right? Because I think that's where USC is going to be in. And last year, I'm not exactly sure what their turnover ratio is, but it was just like absurdly high. Part of that has to do with Caleb Williams protecting the ball. The other part has to do with, honestly, turnover luck. Things bounced their way at an incredibly high rate last year. I think it was the highest turnover margin in the country, which in some stance, that should be a sign of great defensive coaching, but we've seen what their defense does. And so it'll be really interesting to see if they can keep that up this year. But if their turnover margin isn't significantly high this year, they're going to run into a lot of problems because their defense gave up that many points with one of the highest turnover margins in the country. So those are two very different stats that paint a different story. So again, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they get punched in the mouth, and can they consistently win shootouts versus elite quarterbacks? I mean, Drew Pine went 23 of 26 for 320 yards and 3 touchdowns last year, and
he's not very good.
He's not very good. And so it's going to be fun. Like that's just the way it's like chaos and fun throughout the Pac-12, especially
Pac-12 after dark is going to go out with a bang.
Electric.
So just to clean some things up, Phil was correct in his assessment. They led the country in turnover margin. Granted, it was in one more game than Duke. They had 6 more turnovers, or a +6 turnover margin compared to Duke, who was second in the country. So they were that much better than everyone else at forcing turnovers. So I agree with what you say there in terms of the turnovers. That's a very, very interesting point. The team who was the success story in the Pac-12 last year, if it wasn't USC, the Washington Huskies bring in a ton of hype this year. Frankly, Michael Penix Jr. is just a dude. He really is. Rome Odunze is a dude also, and they basically have their entire wide receiver core back. They were not great at running the ball last year, but that didn't really matter. Their offensive line, good news, bad news. Good news is their starting tackles are back. Bad news, they are replacing the entire interior offensive line. So that's something to keep an eye on. The defense goes as the offense goes, meaning when the offense is efficient and it doesn't have the defense on the field a lot, the defense will play pretty well. They got gashed in their losses last year and in a win against Arizona where the offense bailed them out. But they only allowed 22.6 points per game over their final 7 games. So they got better as the season went along. They were the complete opposite of USC when it came to forcing turnovers. They only forced 12 turnovers last year, did Washington. They were pretty good at getting to the quarterback. So if they can continue that and force some turnovers, their ceiling on defense just will continue to grow. And then with an offense that's very good, this is a team that should be very, very good this year. Don't think they'll lose to Boise State in week 1, although Boise State is the favorite in the Mountain West. That's going to be a fun, kind of interesting game to keep an eye on. Another kind of interesting game is the trip to Michigan State. They go to USC. They get Utah at home. They go to Oregon State. And my assessment earlier was correct. They host Washington State. Matt, I saw you smiling and laughing at something. What were you laughing at?
Phil, should we tell him?
Tell him.
Oh, well, Phil's got his name. I was going to say it's no longer our Vols. I teased this yesterday. But
I just noticed.
Phil and I are big on the Huskies this year. We're Washington people. I love them this year for a lot of the reasons that you just said. I think defensively they have something in the Pac-12 that not a lot of those top dogs. I think Oregon might have it with them, but like they're bringing back their two pass rushers who could be draft picks, Braylon Trice and Zion. I'm not going to butcher the Hawaiian last name because I don't want to disrespect them. To bring back all their linebackers, they have some replacing doing the secondary. But if you have a really good front seven, that goes a long way in helping the secondary out. And like you said, they're due for a bounce back and turnover like last year. And then I think offensively, I mean, they were as fun to watch as anybody. The running game's going to have to pick it up a little bit, but like you're bringing back your two tackles. So Michael Penix is very likely to be protected. The receiving core is almost entirely back. All the pieces are there. And I think if the turnover luck kind of bounces their way a little bit more this year, we're talking about a team that should very well be in the race for the Pac-12. And I think they're going to be a team that's in that Pac-12 championship game. I like them to win the Pac-12 this year. I'm incredibly high on Washington. I'm all in. I'm all in. I might need another Washington shirt, so I have two options.
Yeah, my Washington shirt is going to be ordered today. I was trying to decide between the.
This is a good one. It's nice. It's classic. It's got a nice good boy on the chest.
I'm repping my favorite Pac-12 team, UConn.
I was trying to decide between the off-white and the purple, because I have a lot of purple with the Holy Cross Crusaders, as you guys can imagine. But I'm equally as high on Washington's offense. I want to kind of see it to believe it with their offense for the first kind of half of the year, to really have that amount of confidence in it.
I already believe it.
Which the good thing about the Pac-12 is that they're going to see great offenses, they're going to see great quarterbacks, and so we'll know on a national scale what their defense looks like. And could not be higher on Michael Penix Jr. Just the ball explodes out of his hand. I love seeing a lefty throw the ball. He's my favorite lefty quarterback in the Pac-12. So I think that's saying something. I wonder if there's some sort of lefty Heisman bet this year between him and if you can parlay a lefty to win the Heisman Trophy. Because if I could do that, I would take that in a second.
Is Caleb lefty?
Who's the other lefty?
Isn't Caleb Williams lefty?
I don't know. Now I have to look up.
I think he's righty.
Did I make that? I don't think I would make that up.
You might have made that up.
I
think he throws right-handed. We still like Penix to win the Heisman.
Yeah, he's right-handed. Caleb Williams is right-handed.
Good job, Phil.
Good job, Phil. Well, so the only reason I bring that up is because I think Bovada does have you can do an either or Heisman winner. So I'm sure you can be like Caleb Williams or Michael Penix. I don't know if they offer that one specifically, but if he was left-handed, I was going to look up that price for you. I wasn't trying to put you on blast there.
No.
So we're all very high on Washington, obviously. Stop me if you've heard this before, but it really seems like Utah is kind of flying under the radar this year. The defending champions in the Pac-12 flying under the radar a bit, but a lot of that has to do with the major uncertainty surrounding Cam Rising's recovery from the ACL injury he suffered in the Rose Bowl. The betting market would indicate he is not going to play against Florida in the season opener. And man, we're going to know real early what we're going to see from Utah, whether or not they're going to be in contention in this league, because their first 5 weeks of the season, they have Florida, a road trip to Baylor, UCLA, and Oregon State in the first 5 weeks. And they also play USC and Oregon in October. So it feels like a lot of what we are going to know about Utah will be done and dusted by the time the calendar turns to November. Jaquindon Jackson's a really good running back, and they're going to want to run the ball because they're Utah. They're Utah. They're going to want to be physical on both sides on both lines. Their D-line is deep. They have talent on defense in general. They're Utah, so you just expect them to play well. I think if there's any team in this conference that you can just have a baseline expectation for what you're going to get from them, it's Utah.
I want Utah to play spoiler. I want them to play spoiler in a big way because, like you said, I think Cam Rising is probably not going to start the year off, almost certainly for the first couple of games, which is a bummer because he's one of my favorite looking quarterbacks of all time with his old school Buccaneer look. The Pirate, yeah. He's Jack Sparrow just slings the ball all over the place. So, but if you look at their schedule in the back half of the year, he comes back at full strength. They're kind of have a new lease on life. If they lose the couple of games or lose a game in the first few weeks of the season without Cam Rising or without him being kind of full health, there is almost a new lease on life mentality when you have a team where, hey, we lost a couple games early. However, that was without full strength. We're full strength. Let's roll. So it's not playing spoiler in the fact that we want to be spoiler. It's we're almost thinking of our season as starting when Cam Rising is fully back and healthy. And so you look at the games, I think you mentioned, USC, Oregon, Washington. I mean, the back half of their schedule is just brutal, but it comes to them at the right time. So we're talking about chaos. I mean, they go on a stretch where they could beat a top 10 team in USC, top 10 team in Oregon, and a top 10 team in Washington in a 4-week span. And so I just hope that sends shockwaves throughout the college football playoff race this year, because I just want pure chaos.
They have a chance to be, like you said, the ultimate chaos agent, I think, this year. And they have a tough Pac-12. Dan, you say Washington State and Oregon State are their first 2 Pac-12 games?
Their first 2 Pac-12 games are against UCLA and Oregon State.
Okay, so those are like 2 tough games, and if Cam Rising's missing one of them, yeah, like they could realistically start those out 0-2 if Cam Rising's either not playing or just getting back healthy. But they're also a team that, like, with that back half of the schedule, we could be talking about as coming out of nowhere and making a run and getting hot at the right time, and like all of a sudden controls their own destiny to get to the Pac-12 if they split those games and people write them off, and then they run the table, and then all of a sudden they end up being there. They have a chance to just be the ultimate sleeper team this year because, like Dan said, they seem to be written off a little bit early with Cam Rising, and then if they go lose a couple games, this conference is so stacked, it's going to be easy for teams to be like, okay, it's Utah. We have a little bit of a break here, there, whatever, already a 2-loss team, something like that. But that team's going to play really hard. Cam Rising's going to come back at some point and be his old self. And they're just going to be a really physical team. They're going to be tough to beat because you're going to go out and have to beat them up. No one likes playing those football games. Even if you end up winning, you kind of leave banged up, and nobody likes playing those guys. They're going to be, towards the end of the season, I think, just the ultimate fun, chaos, wild card team to watch.
But it's the crazy thing is you could have that sentiment for like most of the teams in the Pac-12, which is I think why I'm so excited to watch all these games this year, right? It's like almost everyone feels like they could be on upset alert every single week, and someone could play spoiler every other week.
So the last team of the kind of elite tier in the Pac-12 is the Oregon Ducks. There are a couple of things that I'm really concerned with this team. Not Bo Nix. I talked about how much I love Bo Nix on our
Big Bo guys.
But their success hinges on a couple of things. They had one of the best offensive lines in college football last year. Their offensive line was awesome. Most of it is gone, and they went to the transfer portal pretty heavy to bring in some veteran guys from a bunch of different places to try to rebuild their offensive line quickly. And I'm always concerned with how an offensive line that's completely rebuilt with transfers is going to gel. And also, you talked about Dan Lanning coming from Georgia. It was kind of surprising how not great their defense was at times last year. They were really, really bad at rushing the quarterback. One of the worst teams in the country at rushing the quarterback. And in this league, that seems like it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, you're going to have to get to them.
What's your assessment on them, Matt?
The offensive line play is a real concern for me. I mean, not that I know they brought in some names and some talent, but that's a group that you, like you said, it's tough to piece together an offensive line right away from the transfer portal, because offensive line play is absolutely built on chemistry and it's built on experience together. Not to say it can't be done, but they're kind of, I mean, they got Texas Tech in week 2, and we talked a little bit about them in the Big 12 preview show, obviously, and they're not sneaking up on anybody this year. But week 2, early tough test, going to Lubbock to play a team that is capable of throwing the ball around. And if you're not rushing the quarterback properly, like that's a team that can very much beat you. And if your offensive line is still figuring things out, that defense is going to have a chance to get to you too. So we're going to learn a lot about them in week 2. I still think they're going to be a very good football team. I do think they'll figure it out. Defensively, obviously, they had their issues last year, but it's year 2 of Dan Lanning's system. I think that's going to lead to an improvement. I'm high on them. Like I said, my team to win the Pac-12 is Washington, but Oregon obviously has a very good chance to do that because they have Bo Nix, and we saw it, which is wild that 365 days ago, if I told myself a year from now, you'll be saying Oregon has a great chance to win the Pac-12 because of Bo Nix, but that's where we're here. That's what we're here saying. Bo Nix was awesome last year, and if he has a repeat performance, they're a team that could easily win the Pac-12, be in the college football playoff, but He's got to stay healthy. He's got to be good Bo. He's got to be good Bo again.
Not SEC Bo. We saw what happened to SEC Bo to start the year last year. Again, we were proven.
Yeah,
right.
all that was he played an SEC team. That's why he was SEC Bo.
Exactly. SEC Bo isn't where we want to be, but I think if they can escape Texas Tech, they're going to be in really good shape because, like you said, more than anything, they need time for their offensive line to gel. And so if they can get through Texas Tech, their season starts October 14th against Washington. That will be a great matchup. And for me, that'll be a huge determining factor in if Oregon is legitimate Pac-12 contender. I'm putting them on the outside looking in right now, just because some of those uncertainties. So I'm high on Bo Nix. You can't count him out after the performance he put up last year. Still smells in the defense. Curious how their middle linebacker play is going to improve with the departure of Noah Sewell. He had been a staple in the middle, and anytime you lose kind of your middle of the pack leader, you're gonna have some adjustments. Which
Chicago Bear Noah Sewell, Bears legend.
I don't think I forgot that. Give him a few weeks to gel for the offensive line and the offensive line and linebackers to gel, which are two critical communication pieces. So just wait until October 14th for me to wait and see who they are.
The team that I think a lot of people are really, really interested in in the outside of this group this year is Oregon State. And you might as well call them the Oregon State Yellow Jackets because the buzz has gotten out of control. But seriously, though, no, in all honesty, I have an argument that I'm going to make right now. And I want you guys to hear this out and give me your thoughts on this. But Oregon State is America's team in 2023. And here's why.
That.
They're about to be left behind along with Washington State, and I just think they're better than Washington State, by the teams that are deserting the Pac-12 and destroying this league. And they have a
Big 12 needs to pick them up.
chance to ruin some seasons along the way. Also, if DJ Uiagalelei is good, that makes Dabo Swinney look bad, which is a plus. So this is a team that's going to be a handful for teams to play. They have an awesome offensive line returning. Damian Martinez is a really, really good running back. They do need to find consistency at wide receiver. Defense is going to be a real issue. They've got a good defensive line. It's strong, but they're replacing a large chunk of the back end of their defense. Jonathan Smith has done a great job with his alma mater. But the one other question that I have kind of in the macro sense with them is what they're doing sustainable? It feels like every time we have a team overachieve its historical norm and then kind of get some buzz going into the next year, there's a comeback to earth period because it's just so hard to sustain. The long and short of it is Oregon State doesn't win 10 games very often. We saw the year Iowa State made it to the Big 12 championship game, brought everyone back the next year, and then they regressed. We talked about NC State last year as being the real buzzy team in the ACC. They kind of took a step back. College football is a sport where water finds its level historically. The big programs, the top programs typically perform at a high level, and when the programs that are less successful historically overperform their historical norms, they tend to come back down even if they are returning talent. That said, love this team, love what they're bringing to the table. Wish their defense was a little bit more solidified to really, really make a run, but they play all of the teams deserting for the Big Ten except for USC. So they're going to have their chance to really be a spoiler in this league, and they are a dark horse to make the conference championship game.
I'm bummed they don't play USC because I think they'd be an awful matchup. And they almost beat USC last year if they didn't turn the ball over 4 times. Go ahead, Phil.
That was brutal. I am rooting for DJU so hard this year simply because I want to be able to scream that Dabo narrative from the rooftops, because you can't – it's the Dabo narrative of that type of quarterback play is going to go away because they brought in obviously Garrett Riley as the offensive coordinator, and so that changes things up quite a bit. But if he comes out and is awesome, it's just a big middle finger to Dabo. But genuinely, I hope there's some quotes that come out. I don't think DJ would, because he seems more of a soft-spoken guy, of just being like, man, I was like a caged bird and needed to be set free under the boot of Dabo Swinney, just because, as you guys know, Dabo is just, in my mind, is just such a dork. Just a dork. And I don't want to get into it too much because we're talking Pac-12 here, but I just love seeing Dabo sad and angry and irrational, and nothing would make me happier than seeing a quarterback that he go away, just tear it up in the Pac-12. Now, I don't know if I necessarily believe that, because I think he some of his issues were rooting and reading defenses, not natural talent. And so anytime that comes to be, you never know. But again, at this time last year, we were saying Bo Nix stinks to all hell, and then he dunked on our faces. But I'm rooting
good
for
thing for DJ is he's not going to be going up against the greatest of defenses. So that's, I mean, in the Pac-12, there are some teams that have some solid defenses, but this is going to be a league mostly of, I think, high-powered offenses, and the team with the most average defense is probably going to be the team that's left standing at the end. I feel like they could be a team that, like, they'll go out and beat an Oregon, or obviously Oregon's at the end of the year, but they'll beat one of the big boys and then end up, losing a game to Arizona or something like that, because they can't – like, Arizona's a team that can put up a bunch of points in a hurry, and they fall behind, and then they're going to have some high highs, but they're going to have some low lows as well. They're capable I mean this in the grand scale of everything. They are capable of just about everything. They're capable of beating anybody in this league, and I think they're capable of losing to anybody in this league not named Stanford and Colorado.
Yeah, I think that they've got a Texas A&M 8-4 waiting for them at the end of this year, in my opinion.
It feels like a realistic possibility for this team. The UCLA Bruins, they are replacing a whole lot of talent. The Washington.
Has Dante Moore won that job yet? Is that official? Not official.
I haven't said it yet.
Not official. But
let him play. Let him cook.
But they lose the Cleveland Browns backup quarterback. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is gone. Zach Charbonnet is gone. Their top 2 wide receivers are gone. 3 offensive linemen are gone. It's a major overhaul. They did get Carson Steele and his pet alligator Crocky J, the running back,
great name,
from Ball State, who had like 1,500 yards last year. Ethan Garbers is the holdover. They also got Colin Schlee from Kent State, the quarterback, to transfer in. But yes, as you mentioned, all eyes are on Dante Moore, the 5-star freshman quarterback, who certainly adds some variance to what UCLA is going to be able to achieve. Last year, their defense struggled. They went to the portal again to try to fortify some things, but nobody really knows. But this is a team that's a huge unknown until we kind of see what Dante Moore looks like, or if Dante Moore is the guy. I do think that Carson Steele coming back will help them kind of stay able to move the ball on the ground, which is something they were very, very good at with DTR and Charbonnet. So that was kind of the calling card. I mean, DTR he was a good player for them, but they really ran the ball exceptionally well. So I like that. But Dante Moore is exceptionally talented. Just have no idea what to expect from any freshman.
But he also doesn't have the running threat that DTR had. So Dan. At first, I thought that was a canned Guinness, by the way, and I was about to say, really getting in the mood.
It's Friday. I mean,
no, it's a fancy looking water bottle.
But obviously, they're gonna miss the legs of DTR because Dante Moore is not. He's an athletic guy, but he is a true pocket.
He's not the runner DTR is.
No, not at all. And what is sad to me is I'm going to miss the DTR fire. Like, he played with his hair on fire. He talked a lot of shit.
Such a great Pac-12 after dark quarterback.
It was truly awesome. And watching him and Charbonnet together were just 2 horses. And I think Steele does a good job of replacing that type of mentality of a thick running back who is just a tough SOB. But until you see what their offense looks like, and until you see what Dante Moore looks like, this is the biggest wild card of anybody. For me in the Pac-12. I mean, Chip Kelly's offenses can always do some magnificent things, but this isn't the traditional Chip Kelly quarterback. It's the traditional pocket passer, not necessarily a dual threat guy. So very curious to see what Dante Moore looks like if he gets to start. My money's on yes. Maybe it's not the first game, but he'll inevitably start
eventually.
Yeah.
I think this is for me the ultimate sleeper team in the Pac-12. Their schedule starts fairly light. Is Grayson McCall back at Coastal? I'm not making that up, right? He's back at Coastal. That's a weird first game, them hosting Coastal, but they'll win that game. San Diego State, they should beat. NC Central, they should beat. Utah is their first conference game of week 4, but again, we don't know, is Cam Rising going to be back by then? Is that going to be his first game? Is he going to be getting his feet wet? Like, that has the potential to be not the most difficult first conference game. It also has the potential to be a very tough one. But they feel like a team that, once they get things rolling towards the end of the year, they might be a team that nobody wants to play. And they miss Oregon. They miss Washington. They miss Washington this year. They got Utah, Oregon State, USC. Obviously, USC is a rivalry game. Anything can happen there. I know it's technically at USC, but the home team doesn't matter in that series. They have a Pac-12 schedule that sets up favorably for them. I mean, they have their biggest games are on the road at Utah, at Oregon State. I obviously just mentioned USC, but like, there's a pretty real chance that they might start out slow but get things moving by the end of the year and be a team that has one Pac-12 loss going into that USC game and be playing for a conference championship.
No, they're not. Because here's why. I said it last year. On the show. Let's not forget. They had that game against South Alabama where there was nobody at the Rose Bowl and they almost lost.
Yeah, that was fun.
They got off to a great start in the league. Then they played they played Oregon and they lost. And I said on this show, because it's UCLA, they're going to lose to one of the Arizona schools. They ended up losing to Arizona. I get where you're coming from, but this is just a program that historically can.
Yeah, that they're gonna have a head scratching.
There's gonna be one game like on their schedule where it's like, do they play Cal this year? Like
last game of the year, which is weird. They played them the last game of the year.
Wasn't that how it? That's how it went last year too. Like
November 25th. Cal.
Like it's just weird. Like I get it, but like UCLA, they're a huge just like a wrench in everybody's plans this year. I only have notes, like written out notes on two more teams. I do want to talk about Arizona State and Colorado very briefly in a second. Washington State. They hired a 27-year-old offensive coordinator. If you will excuse me, my bones are going to go further grind into dust. I'll talk to you guys later.
Ben Arbuckle. I was about to talk
Arbuckle from Western Kentucky.
That's a great name. Of course, Ben Arbuckle's from Western Kentucky.
So I was looking that up, and it was like new offense coordinator Ben Arbuckle. I'm like, man, this guy is coached everywhere. Just in my mind, it sounds like an old school quarterback whisperer, long time, like lower tier offensive coordinator.
Yeah, he's got the Wikipedia page this long.
Yeah, I looked at his bio, and I was like, hold up a second. How did I miss this, and why did I think this was familiar? Couldn't figure out why. But he's going in with, I think with the chance to have an awesome quarterback, to put up some huge numbers, who's going to be seeing his second year in Division I football. Obviously, he was at Incarnate Word before then. But moving in, I think it'll be more comfortable. Their offense can be awesome this year. I'm rooting for a lot of the Matt. What's the uniform? What uniform combo did we love last year? The grays, like the dark gray and maroon.
Oh, I love the gray helmet with the maroon.
Yeah,
the maroon, like all maroon with the gray helmet.
Yeah, they can be a great uniform team. So I didn't even mention.
I love all their uniforms. I don't think they have a bad uniform combo.
No, they don't. So I'm really curious to see if Cam Ward takes a step forward, because he had a really solid first year making the transition from FCS to FBS, and hopefully with Ben Arbuckle, who coached one of the top offenses in college football, coached one of the top quarterbacks in the history of college football in terms of pure just performance and yardage and totals and things like that. Curious to see if he takes a massive step forward, because I can absolutely see it. No clue what's going to go on with their defense, but again, they're my favorite almost every year ever. They're my favorite Pac-12 spoiler team because they always just put together some wild offensive performances. And with Arbuckle coming in, I don't think that changes.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that pairing with Cam Ward, because I think Cam Ward was solid last year, but like you could tell he was still kind of getting his feet wet to Division I or FBS football, I should say at times. And I think with the new offensive system, that's going to be really favorable to him as a quarterback. I feel like I've said this about half the teams. They got a chance to be like the ultimate spoiler. And this is like, this comes back to what we were saying when Dan initially put the ratings up on the screen to start the show. Like, there's so many teams in this conference that can beat any one of the other teams in this conference on a given day if the chips go the right way. And I think it's really the only conference in college football that you could say that. Like, there's over 4/5 or whatever I said of the conference can really beat anybody on a given day. And Washington State certainly fits in that category if they, like you said, Phil, have one of their epic offensive outbursts.
The problem for this team is going to be the problem they had last year, which is they had one of the worst offensive lines in college football. They want to throw the ball down the field more. Ben Arbuckle is coming in to do that, but they were 121st in the country in yards per completion last year because they were 124th in passing down sack rate. Kentucky was the only team that allowed more sacks at the FBS level than Washington State did last year. So as good as Cam Ward could potentially be, their offensive line does not get better. It's not going to get much better for him.
They got to figure that out. Yeah.
They had 2 second all Pac-12 pass rushers in Ron Stone and Brennan Jackson, but not a whole lot else to write home about on defense. Another team that you cannot overlook in this league, you should beat their landmine team. I think if you overlook them, they might blow up your season. If
Arizona,
you will probably take care of business, but it is the Arizona Wildcats. I was wrong about Jed Fish. I thought that was an awful hire. He's done a surprisingly decent job. Jaden DeLora, the ultimate YOLO quarterback, is back. You talk about like perfect Pac-12 after dark quarterbacks. Jaden DeLora was built in a lab for that. Tedero, McMillan, Jacob Cowing give them a good wide receiver duo. They have 5 linemen back who started games. So their offense will probably be good. Their defense, it's going to be almost impossible for their defense to be worse. They probably had the worst defense at the Power 5 level last year, worse than Colorado, worse than some of the others, but they are the Pac-12 after dark darlings. Like, I need as many Arizona games on at 10:30 at night as possible.
Go ahead, Phil.
They've got nothing.
That's it. That you said it. That's all that needs to be said about Arizona.
I am so excited for October 14th when Arizona and Washington State get together for Pac-12 after dark. That's going to be a game where I'm probably reeling from some bets that I've lost throughout the day, and those two are kicking off at 9:30 local time. The over is 69.5. I doubled down on the over. Lock it in. We go all in, and the final score is 45-41. Yeah.
As far as Arizona State is concerned, I didn't write down any notes. I will just say this. I really respect Kenny Dillingham taking his first head coaching job and being like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm rolling with the freshman. Jaden Rashada, who, if you probably remember from the NIL drama at Florida, was named their starting quarterback. I'm just going to guess that the two of you are now very high on Kenny Dillingham because he picked Jaden Rashada over Drew Pine.
Smart move.
Honestly,
I feel bad being mean to Drew Pine because he does seem like he's a good kid and was like he did an admirable job as a quarterback. He just wasn't very good.
Yeah. My thing with that is any Notre Dame guys who transfer out, I actually love watching them. So it's guys who you've especially have written tons about them, like you know a lot about their backstory. You've seen them, watched them, studied them. So for me, I was sad because he was actually in line to potentially win the starting job, and then he had they called like a light hamstring tear, which I don't know what a light hamstring tear is. Doesn't seem good regardless. But I think we'll still see Pine come in a bit of a veteran role this year in backup because Rashad is going to have some learning
freshman
curves,
moments. Yeah.
Some freshman moments. And honestly, I think this role that Pine could take on will be really good for Rashada because Pine seems like very much a team first guy who's probably going to be a coach at some point because we know he's not going to the NFL. So I was rooting for him to play, but I'm really excited to see Rashada because I like seeing super highly rated freshman quarterbacks get an opportunity to play, especially when you've seen some of like their upside and studied their tape, and any of those top guys, we've watched their highlight tape. So I'm excited to see him play, and I'm glad he's at Arizona State and not Florida. I don't know why.
Especially in a situation like that too, where the pressure isn't necessarily too high. Like it's not like your USC of last year and Caleb Williams just left and they're going to go with the 5-star freshman and, have national championship hopes. Jaden Rashada steps into a role where it's like, all right, like you got all the time in the world to learn on the fly. We got a rookie or first year head coach. He's kind of learning on the fly too. There's not pressure to go win 8, 9, 10 games this year. Let's just go learn on the fly. Let's play some good football. Let's win some games. And I think that's just a million times easier of a position for a highly hyped freshman quarterback, especially to step into a role and succeed.
Do you guys have anything on Cal? I don't even think Cal knows they have a football team.
Nope. No.
Did you guys have anything?
Other than you said they'll beat UCLA. They'll beat UCLA on November 25th.
Do you guys have anything to add to this? What I said about Stanford at the beginning of the show?
Nothing.
I hope they get better. I like when Stanford's fun.
All right. Well, we covered everyone in the Pac-12. Oh wait,
yeah, give us your Colorado nugget, Dan.
One other team we've got to talk about. It's the Colorado Buffaloes. I dropped it in the DMs yesterday for Phil and Matt that I had the most galaxy brain take regarding Colorado football that even I was kind of astounded at. And bear with me because I'm going to try to talk this out and see if this is going to make any sense.
Talk it out. That's why we're here, Dan. Talk it out to us.
I kind of wonder if Deion Sanders' coaching path is going to mimic Tom Herman at Texas and Scott Frost at Nebraska. And here's why I say that. Deion Sanders did an awesome job at Jackson State, but he had some advantages there. Namely, he came in and yes, he brought them with him, but he had a much, much better roster than everybody else in the SWAC, in his division in the SWAC. Like, they were that much better with the players that he brought in. He also has no experience building a program over a sustained period of time. He was at Jackson State for 3 years. He was there during the COVID year, the COVID spring season. He was then there, he was there in 2021, and then he was there in 2022. And so we don't know if Deion Sanders has any ability to build a program or not. And that was the same problem when people look back at what happened with Tom Herman and what happened with Scott Frost was they ascended so fast to bigger jobs. Nobody really took the time to notice that Tom Herman inherited a pretty good roster at Houston and Scott Frost inherited a pretty good roster at UCF. And those two guys did a good job taking talented teams that were a lot more talented than the other teams in their conference, built them into conference championship caliber teams, and then moved on to bigger jobs. And when they got to bigger jobs, they weren't good at laying the foundational kind of stuff that they needed to do. They talked a big game, they talked the talk, and they couldn't walk the walk. And that's the thing about Deion Sanders. Like when you talk about the most charismatic people in the history of sports, like the only name, when I was trying to think this through, the only name that popped into my head that I would compare is Muhammad Ali.
Yeah,
like
that's about it.
There's a handful of names. Like if you want to say Magic Johnson was as charismatic, okay, perhaps I'd go that far. But realistically, the short list of guys who are as charismatic as Deion Sanders is very short. I just wonder if it's, as they say, all hat, no cattle, all sizzle, no steak. Now that he's got a big job where it's going to be very, very hard for them to get good, they can't just recruit well there. They've got to develop the talent. They've got to develop the habits to build a good team. And so much of what Deion Sanders has done thus far feels so performative to me. It feels like Deion Sanders has been trying to make a documentary about how great Deion Sanders is as a coach. And so I really wonder if he's got the chops to do this long term, or if we're going to find out the same way we found out that Tom Herman and Scott Frost were ill-equipped for big-time Power 5 jobs, if that's going to be the same thing with Deion Sanders.
He's going to be completely exposed. And I'm not saying exposed in a bad way, but I'm saying exposed in a way where he's going to have all the lights on him. He's talked all the shit. He made some controversial decisions, which have made him a bit of a heel in college football. For me, he was a guy when he went to Jackson State, rooting incredibly hard for him. Even making the switch over to Colorado, I'm like, this is going to be fun, rooting hard for him. But he's embraced a bit of the heel role with some of, as you mentioned, the performative types of conversations of, hey, I brought my own baggage, cutting some guys to their scholarships, a lot of kind of dark shit, right? Where it's ran a lot of guys out of town, which roster needed turnover. That was no surprise to anyone. I don't like the way that he went about it as a former player myself. However, if it works, it's going to be celebrated like crazy. I don't think it's going to, especially this year, but it's a time where he can't hide behind a super talented roster that has 5 stars when there's not a single other star on the field. And so very curious to see how his son at quarterback will transfer to how that talent will transfer to the FBS level. What they do have is 2 first-round draft picks at cornerback in Travis Hunter and Cormani McLean. And so both of that can cover up some scars, right? When you can lock down other teams' best receivers. But at the end of the day, I don't think it happens this year. And it'll be fun to watch him fail or succeed in either way, because it's going to be a show.
It better work quickly, because his whole shtick is how he's going to come in here. He's going to fix everything. He's the magic potion. We're going to turn this around. And we're going to be real good right away. That works now. But if you go 3-9 this year, and then you go 3-9 again next year, that becomes really difficult to spin to recruits. It becomes really difficult to spin to transfers that you got this figured out and you got this all locked down and you're going to take care of it and everything's going to change. This year's going to be bad. I don't think this year is going to be indicative on, who he is as a head coach, just as much as Colorado is in a bad spot as a program and they're, ton of changes on the fly. They're bringing in a lot of Jackson State talent, especially the quarterback, to come in and play in what's going to be one of the more competitive conferences in the country. I just think a lot of that talent's in for a rude awakening in terms of competition this year. But if they don't get it figured out by next year, he's going to start running thin on recruits, on people in that program, on his own players. If his shtick doesn't work, it gets old very, very fast to people inside of the program and to people outside of the program. So it better work fast. That's kind of my thing with Deion. It has to work quickly.
Well, they also didn't do a good job, I think, of bringing in necessarily non-skill position talent. So
no, he brought in quarterbacks. He brought in quarterbacks, receivers, and running backs, and sometimes that's nice. But works, if you can't block for him, if you can't get to him,
exactly.
It works at Jackson State. Works in the FCS. It doesn't work in the Pac-12. It doesn't work in Power 5.
No, so that's for me going to be their downfall this year, is that they're going to have some skill position players that are obviously elite. They're going to make some highlight reel plays like crazy, but they're also going to get put on their asses.
It's going to be like Shohei Ohtani and Mike Trout highlights. Like Shohei Ohtani threw a complete game shutout and had a grand slam. Mike Trout had 2 home runs, and the Angels lost 14-8. Like that's what it's going to be, I think.
Yeah.
We move on to our bets. I don't know if Phil remembered to make one. Phil, did you grab a bet?
I did. It was get back to
me. Real quick. What team player, what kind of bet?
It was.
We usually kind of discuss this beforehand, and we didn't, so I'm kind of curious.
It was Pac-12 odds,
okay.
And it was who is plus. I had one that I kind of like is Utah plus 550 to win the Pac-12, just because I think if they can squeak by Texas Tech and Cam Rising comes back, I think their defense is really going to step up, and I'm looking at that for me as a value pick that has a decent amount of upside. So I'm going to sprinkle a little bit on that one.
Matt, are you a team player? What's your?
I'm going Michael Penix over 3750
over
passing yards.
3,
I think it's 3750. Yeah, yeah. He had 4,600 last year. That's a team that, like we talked about in their preview, their running game is a complement to the passing game, and it's not really much there. Hopefully, it's a little bit improved, but with an interior offensive line that you're kind of replacing pieces and working new stuff in, that's something that's going to take a little time to come. Michael Penix is going to be that offense this year. I'm going to take it. I think that's a low passing total for this year. I think he gets 4,000 easy.
All right. Mine is a Michael Penix bet as well. Guys, mine is an awards bet.
I'm saying to be the Heisman finalist like you did.
I'm picking Michael Penix Jr. to win the Davey O'Brien Award.
I was just looking at those odds.
He's 8-1 at Caesars. He's 8-1 at Caesars to win the Davey O'Brien Award. I think the threshold will be lower, and I feel like that's a very real career achievement possibility for Michael Penix Jr. That way I don't have to worry about the politics that go into the Heisman.
No, I like that a lot. What were the odds again? What did you say?
8-1 at Caesars.
Oh, I like that a lot. I think I might get that.
So Michael Penix Jr. 8-1 to win the Davey O'Brien Award is my Pac-12 bet for the year, guys. We've done it. We have football tomorrow. Good luck to your Irish as the Irish kick off the FBS season tomorrow in Dublin. Good luck. Did you guys buy your home field bomber jackets today?
I
don't have $130.
I haven't seen it yet. It's $130.
Oh yeah, their bomber jackets are ridiculous, but they're awesome.
They're sick. They're awesome, but I don't have $130.
You know what? If Notre Dame puts on a pretty good performance and covers against Navy this week, maybe I'll have enough to buy. How about that?
I love it. All right. Well, we hope everyone enjoys the football. Football season is finally here. We get to watch some games tomorrow. So pumped for that. We'll be back, I'm assuming Thursday. We'll discuss schedule on Thursday to get into the week 1 slate of the college football season. We appreciate you guys riding with us. We hope you learned something. We hope you were entertained by it. If not, we don't really care. We had fun, and that's all that really matters to us. For Phil, for Matt, I'm Dan. We will talk to you next week for week 1. We'll see you then.